Okay, good morning again. My name is Scott Clausen with PPM Works. Good to see you all. Last day of the conference. Lots of sleep after the evening event, I'm sure. I appreciate your time here. So I'm here today with Kenji Nishihara, Manager of Scientific Operations at Allegan, Inc. Kenji and I have a long history. I actually started working with him 10 years ago, back on Project Server 2003. And it's been a journey since that time. We're going to share a little bit of that with you here today. So our topic is one that I think will resonate with a lot of you here at the conference. It's on expanding Project Server from one department or two throughout your organization. And this is a topic that I'm usually asked by customers a half dozen times a year. In fact, since I proposed this concept, I was actually asked by two different customers the question of, we'd like to grow Project Server to another department, another group in our organization. How do we do that? And that's what we're going to cover today. So also with Kenji is Angie DeLuca. She's on Kenji's team. Kenji, by the way, is a chemist turned project manager, so he has both a scientific and PMP background. A little bit about Kenji and Angie's company, Allegan, Inc. So Allegan is a multi-specialty healthcare company established more than 60 years ago. They're focused on discovering, developing, and commercializing innovative pharmaceuticals, biologics, and medical devices. They're headquartered not far from here in Irvine, California. 11,400 employees and a presence in more than 100 countries. In 2012, they invested nearly $1 billion in their specialty pharmaceutical pipeline. And currently, they have 6 departments on Project Server. 5 of them are scientific. 1 is information technology. Kenji and Angie's department was the very first one on Project Server. And a little bit about my company, PPM Works. So we are a Microsoft Certified Silver Partner in 3 areas: project and portfolio management, SharePoint, and business intelligence, 3 of the critical areas for the Project Server platform. We believe in partnering with you, exceeding expectations, and long-lasting success. We have deep experience with Microsoft technologies. We share our expertise as volunteers for Microsoft Project Summit, PMI, and MPUG. And we also donate a portion of our revenues to charity. And in light of that, at the end of the session, we're going to be collecting business cards, and the winner will donate $100 to a charity of their choice. So stick around and have a business card ready. So first, a little bit from you. Let's hear a little bit from you. So in your current Project Server environments, how many of you have more than one department or group using Project Server today? Okay, so it is pretty common not just to have one. And then how many of you plan to expand to another department or group in the next 6 months? Good. And then so those of you that said yes there, are you looking to expand more than 2 departments? Couple, more than 3? Okay, well, there's definitely some that have come to the right session, and I'm sure you're going to have some good takeaways. So the agenda for the talk, we're going to kind of start from the basis for expansion, helping you build that business case internal. You may be ready to go and get into the expansion, but we're going to take a step back from that and first discover the basis for expansion, why you would consider expansion, how you can go about approaching other departments in your organization for Project Server. And in this first section, I'm going to interview Kenji and talk about the origin of expansion at Allegan. Our second major topic is going to be options for expansion. This is really probably the technical meat of the presentation. We're going to look at how do you make that decision, whether you should just bring someone into your project environment, whether you should buy a whole other set of servers for them, or just work with a configuration in one system to allow 2 groups to have 2 instances. We're going to talk about next expansion best practices, looking at as you go about expanding, what should you do, keep in mind as you go through that. And lastly, after you've expanded, what's different when you've gone from 1 to X number of departments. And also in that last section, I'll have the third interview with Kenji, looking at the last 10 years in review at Allegan. How many of you recall this video game here on the left? Tetris. So this was created by a Russian programmer in the 80s. I read where it was first introduced on the Commodore 64. The idea was that you would have this puzzle piece that would start on the top of the screen, and you could toggle to spin the puzzle piece. And the idea is that you wanted to fit it nicely on your platform there on the bottom. And I thought this was a good analogy for what it's like to have a new department on the horizon for Project Server. You need to think about your, what considerations and actions there are to properly expand your environment. And if you just say, come on, the environment, we're ready for you, you might look like this. Fragmented, disorganized, the security gets crossed, people aren't able to see or trust the data, things like that. And so that's really what we're going to aim for in this presentation, talk about expansion, what you should be aware of as you go about the journey. Okay, so let's take a step back and talk about the basis for expansion. So why should you first consider expansion? Maybe you're building a business case, you have that single department, and you want to know why you should even consider expanding. Some of these are obvious, but let's go through them. First, increase your return on the platform investment. So you've already, had someone install Project Server, you've got it running, you've already paid the server licenses. Obviously, the higher number of users you have on that platform, you're going to return your investment on it. Realize cost efficiencies of a single project and portfolio management tool. I know it's pretty common in large organizations to kind of have, different groups have different PPM tools, but there are cost efficiencies to having the same tool from a training standpoint as well, general understanding of what capabilities are there. Drive consistency in your project and portfolio management processes. The example I like to use is UPS, supposedly all of their different shipping hubs are run similarly so that they can pull someone out of one and move them across the country, put them in another one, and they're instantly productive because they know how the process works regardless of the location. And you should really strive to have the same sort of setup with your project and portfolio management where your PMs can really move across organizations. They might not have the technical knowledge, but they would know the tool, they would know the process. Reduce risks of duplicate efforts. Having a larger project portfolio management base is going to mean less likely you have projects that are off on their side, soloed. Maybe people are repeating the same type of work. A common enterprise project and portfolio management gives you that visibility, so you're not repeating work. You're doing things most efficiently. Streamline resource management. The larger number of users you have on the platform is going to be a larger resource pool you can pull from, so you're going to know utilization better, so on and so forth. Promote your team. This is what I like. What's in it for you? You can kind of become an entrepreneur, and I think of Kenji and Angie a lot that way. They've shown the organization Project Server, and it's made them look good. Okay, so you understand now some of the basis for expanding, and now we're going to talk about how you would build awareness on this platform. And I think one of the basics is understanding all the capabilities there. So you have project intake capabilities. That would be people suggesting projects in the very early stage. Portfolio management, project execution, milestone tracking, cost management, resource management, task statusing, timesheets, issue, risk management, team collaboration. These are hopefully some of the great features that you've heard about at the conference. It's unlikely that your group or a single group would use all of these features, but it is important to understand they're there because a lot of times you'll have, say, one department not using timesheets, another one has a need for timesheeting, and knowing that that's a capability of the platform is important. Other ways to build awareness in your organization. Educate users on the value proposition. So a lot of times it's not the individuals that are administering the system or the high-level managers that are using the reports out of the system that would share the value proposition. It's a lot of times the team members or the functional managers that are just in the system in and out very quickly each week. It's those users that really potentially can share the benefit with others in the organization, particularly the cross-functional managers. Writing a case study is a great help to building awareness. You can go out to the Microsoft project site. You see some professional case studies. Internally, you don't need to be that formal, It can be a few simple paragraphs and bullet points about the value you have in the system. Third one here, develop a demo. Kenji calls this the roadshow, right? He'll talk about that. So Kenji has a demo. It's something he developed. It doesn't take him more than 45 minutes. Anytime someone asks him about the system, he pulls it up, he goes through it. He's done it so many times, he doesn't even have to rehearse anymore, I don't believe. And it's a great tool for just communicating internally what the value is. Using those internal communication channels, if you have a case study, a demo, there's ways to promote it on an intranet site, things like that. And of course, identify sponsors. If you have someone interested, maybe they're not the ones that would sponsor the project. You want to figure out who else in the organization would sponsor it. So that's really what I have on some of the background for expanding. So this will be the first point where I want to bring Kenji up and go through a couple of questions with him. Mic on?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So Kenji, so we're going to talk about your department first. So how does your department use Project Server?
So we were the first one, so we were kind of the guinea pigs in our corporation, and we mainly use it for project planning. We're program managers as well, so we actually are looking at resource management under the drug development pipeline, project planning, resource management, as well as specific task, timeline management in terms of scheduling. So we use it as a driving scheduling tool as well. We have, within my department or division, we have 7 departments. Although we're all under one umbrella, they're mainly made up of about 80% scientists who are very siloed in their mentality of how they work. And so we use Project Server to kind of attend to their needs even within our own department.
Okay, great. And you'll hear Kenji sometimes refer to a project as studies.
Right, and I can explain that. For the way we've customized, or the way we use our Project Server instance, is that Microsoft projects, we use them, or we have relabeled them for use of what are called studies, whether they're non-clinical or clinical studies, and then we have tasks underneath them. So, and we probably have about 800 studies a year ongoing at any given time, and each of them probably have about 50 to 100 tasks.
Great, thank you. So what are the different ways new departments have learned about Project Server at Allegan?
So kind of what Scott was saying, I've kind of termed it the roadshow. So what has happened in Allegan over the last 10 years is, as we've worked in the non-Project Server environment in terms of just doing our day job, so to speak, we've come across where other departments and other functional managers are asking some of the same questions that we would have in our group, specifically about metrics, about productivity, resourcing. Usually it's around resourcing. And so it began with me sharing a little bit about, well, this is what we use, and then they said, okay. And then it would work its way to a demo where I would sit with the management of that division and basically in 45 minutes or 60 minutes in one meeting, go through our instance of Project Server. I think, going back to one of the points you had made, Scott, to get buy-in and compliance, which is always a problem from the business side. I think from the IT side, they always tell you what could be, but I think for buy-in, other managers really respond very well as a fellow manager to say, this is what worked, this is what didn't, this is why we use it. And so it became very, very effective in explaining how we used it.
So I went through some of this already, but the demo length, I mean, what type of features do you cover? How long is it?
So we kept it simple. I mean, I would try to tailor it to the specific division that I was demoing, but basically we would go over Project Center, Resource Center, and then really kind of dive into reporting. As you know, management, they're interested in how the report is made, but not so much. I mean, at the end of the day, they want to see certain parameters so that they can make the right decision. So I usually jump into reporting. Once they start seeing some reports, as other sessions have said, more questions start coming up. And then that's when we can start asking questions of, okay, this is why we use it. What would you use it for? So that was really But a lot of it is just the visual tools that are in Project Center, out-of-the-box things. We have a lot of customized fields, so I explain how we use that and how they could use it. Out of the other departments, and then maybe this is another question coming up, we are probably the most granular. So we have very detailed study lists because we use it for scheduling, whereas other instances are just at the project level.
Good. And do you typically, you said this already, you don't necessarily demo the same material each time. What about in the cases where someone's asked for a totally different feature? Have you just mentioned it's there, type of thing, or?
Right. I pretty much demo the same material every time because that's pretty much what we do. But just working with you and learning about Project Server, I know that there's many things that it can do that we don't use, and I share that as well. I usually add a caveat to it, to be honest, of why maybe we're not using it. And we're right now in Project Server 2010. Actually, I don't know if you mentioned that, so just to let you know.
Okay. And you might have mentioned some of this already, but besides demos, we've been talking a lot about that. Is there any other techniques that you've used?
I think one of the biggest things is just face-to-face, just conversations with individuals. I mean, it sounds, I guess, archaic in all the technology, but that really we found that was the best buy-in, and we found that was the best way of really implementing Project Server as well. And then in terms of building awareness within our own group, a lot of it in the beginning was, hey, look, this is a great tool. Scientists, people made comments throughout the sessions about engineers. Scientists are probably worse, So to get them in the mindset of what business intelligence is, or even business capacity planning, it took a lot of sit-downs and kind of holding people's hands in the beginning. And so that was a lot of manual conversations that were needed.
Okay. And last question for this segment. So how have you benefited from building awareness on Project Server?
Oh, one of the most obvious ones is probably that everyone's getting onto the same page when they're communicating. So being in drug development, we're just one component of the overall pipeline. And so the fact that other divisions are now getting onto the same language, quote-unquote language, then we can start talking about project timelines the same way. We can talk about deliverables the same way. Until that happened, everyone had their own perception. Each PM had their own idea of what critical path was for themselves. So this tool was a great way of kind of driving people to be standardized.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you, Kenji. I'll bring you back in just a moment. So this is where I'll transition a little bit to more of the technical side and talk about options for expansion. And I think, even if you're not in a technical role in your organization, it's good to get this high-level picture of what options you have and what would be kind of the decision process for expanding. Now, if somehow you've got to this point in the conference and you haven't heard about Project Online yet, you're not going to make it through without hearing me talk about it. But it does have important context in when we talk about expansion. So just kind of the basics of what you would have with Project Online. So essentially, on the left there, we have Project Server on-premise. So that's maybe the environment you're in right now. Of course, the benefits there, you have full control of your hardware. It's most flexible for customizations. You have control of when you're going to do software updates, things like that. But if you're willing to start to give away some of that control, the value proposition to going to, say, a hosted partner, which you would call infrastructure as a service, IaaS, would be that you would eliminate some of the infrastructure management. You still would have some options to customize. And you still can have kind of full support of all the Project Server platform features. And then moving all the way up to Office 365 Project Online, of course, the value proposition there is that you're going to have high availability. Particularly when we talk about expansion, and I'm going to get back to this in a moment, you really can scale to any size department or number of departments you're going to need. and you would have that benefit. So just keep this in mind. We're going to come back to Project Online in a moment when we talk about the details of expansion. But this is the scenario I want to play out and kind of walk through, is that you have some different structure options when you're expanding your project server on-premise environment. And the three structure options we're going to talk about, number one on the left there is a shared instance. So this is where you would take your existing department and you would bring another department onto the same instance. So that would be the first option you would have. It's maybe the simplest in terms of setup, but it does require quite a bit of configuration. The second option you would have is what I call separate instances on a single platform. So you're using the same hardware, but you essentially bring in two different instances. They're going to have a different URL, if you will. So that's the second option you have. And then the third one is you keep them physically separate, so you actually have a separate hardware platform. So I know there's hybrids of these three, but do these three kind of make sense for three approaches? Merging everything together, using the same hardware but two instances, that's called separate instances. And the third one is two hardware environments, separate platform. So we're going to use these three, and we're going to talk about how you go about a decision to how you would expand using one of these three architectures. Okay, and this is a slide I call the decision criteria for structure options. It's a very wordy title, but this is really kind of the meat of the structure options. So the first thing we're going to look at is, when would you want to stick with a shared instance? Okay? When you want to stick to having one instance and kind of bringing your apartments together. The first reason you would want to do that is if you had cross-department resources and projects. So if you have another department coming on your project server environment, and they're going to share your same resource pool, if resources are going to participate on the same projects, or projects are going to have cross-project dependencies, you're going to want to keep them in the same instance. Okay? Another criteria would be if you have cross-department portfolio management. So if you plan to do strategic ranking and decide on selecting projects that are going to proceed with execution based on two or more departments that you're going to have in your environment, again, you're going to want to keep them in the same instance so you can do that cross-department portfolio management. Third criteria would be cross-department time reporting. So even if maybe for some reason you don't staff projects with resources from two departments, if they're going to report their time that way, that would be another requirement where you really would want to stick with a shared instance. Fourth one, cross-department reporting. So I know you can do some nice things by combining multiple project server instances and reports, but if you want to talk about the out-of-the-box reporting, the resource center, the business intelligence center, things that you're going to get out of the box, you want to have those two departments in the same instance if you're really interested in that type of reporting. And then lastly, I kind of crammed a bunch of stuff in here, but if you have common required fields, common ways you want to run timesheets, common ways you want to do task statusing or other configurations, those would be reasons for a shared instance. So basically, if you answer no to all these questions, you can go on and consider another architecture option. And we're going to go to the next one now, which is going to be a separate platform. This is where we have two sets of hardware. So what would be some of the reasons why you would want a separate platform? Number one, do you have resource hogs? Is there one of your departments that's going to be processing the cube 3 times a day? Or they have some customization that really ties up projects. Those type of resource hogs might mean that you would want a separate server for them. Can you scale your platform? So sometimes you can't scale your platform. Maybe the hardware you purchased is not scalable, or maybe you have, it's difficult to negotiate scaling in your environment. That might be a reason why we'd have to build out separate. Can you share the platform costs? So maybe the two departments, maybe there's financial arrangements that make it difficult for you to share costs. And lastly, is it okay that you can update or upgrade software at one time? So basically, again, if you've answered no to these, yes to these, you would be looking at kind of a a separate environment, a separate platform. And then we'll go on to the third option, which would be separate instances. And this is actually, in the case of Allegan, what they do have a lot. So what would be factors that would kind of land you on separate instances? One of them is, do you have customizations? For example, if you're bringing data in and out of a financial system, it's going to be a lot easier bringing that data in and out of a financial system to one platform. So you wouldn't really, if you have those sort of customizations, it might make it difficult to have separate platform, or even shared custom applications. So you go out and purchase some of the great vendor products you've seen out there on the show floor. If you have those sort of things in your environment, it's a lot easier to have those, actually more cost-effective and easier to have them in one environment than two physically separate servers. So what I was trying to take you through in this decision criteria is all the basic decisions you would go through. And if you went, starting on the left, you went through a shared instance and you didn't hit any of those requirements, you then thought about separate platforms, you didn't hit any of those requirements, then lastly, separate instances, and you still didn't hit any of those requirements, then you're kind of open to do whatever works best for your organization. But if you do catch on any of these, that's where you would kind of stop in this and consider what's going to work best. So it kind of gives you a sense of what you would think about as you go about expanding. Okay, Kenji, you're going to come up again here for some questions. So the other departments that are, and we mentioned already, there was initially your department, and now there are 6. So are they using Project Server in the same way as you?
In quick answer is yes. The detailed answer would be actually no, in terms of the, they're looking at it more at the high level. So like I said, a lot of the other divisions are looking at projects only, milestones, and maybe just deliverables. Part of the roadshow that we provided was our lessons learned, which we can get to, I think we'll get to later, yeah. About starting simple. We kind of put everything all together and said, good luck, you know. And so part of the roadshow is our lessons learned. And so most departments are using it just at the very high level at projects and milestones, where we have it, again, used as a scheduling tool as well.
Okay. So in your case, most departments have been added as separate instances. That was the middle example on the first slide I showed. So do you feel this was the correct choice?
For us, I think so. Because of the different requirements, every division is a little bit different in how they operate. I would love to say that we're all on the same boat, you know, and managing our projects the same. But that's just not the reality, especially when you start looking at global projects. And so for where we are now in our organizational maturity, I mean, it's exactly where we need to be, I think.
Let me ask just another question on this. So if instead of doing separate instances, if instead you tried to bring one of those other departments, bring their resources and fields and views into your project server environment, you know, would that have worked? Do you think it would have been a challenge, or?
It would have been definitely a challenge, because each division has their own challenges anyway, just dealing with new technology. And so, but then again, you know, you would be pushing the envelope in terms of standardizing. So it just depends on your organization, I think. Yeah. For Allergan, out of the 6 departments, I would say maybe 3 of them I could see coming together pretty quickly. Right. Whereas the other 3, there's more challenges there. So okay. It just depends.
Good. Now, so when the environment grew from just your group to having these 6, did it impact you in any way? Did you feel like things changed, or?
I think we're still early in that, and I would like to say that it was a high impact. I think one of the biggest things is, again, like I said before, is the language. People start just awareness. I think people, we have one division I'm thinking of in particular that their job is to feed certain products into ours so we can do our timeline. So we're really dependent on their timeline. And that was one of the first departments we tried to kind of nudge to say, hey, we would like to have some visibility, because they would just tell us as it got closer to the deadline, oh, we're not going to make it. And these are hundreds of $1 million projects. So we needed a little more than that. So that, in a way, changed the type of communication we were having in our project teams, and that had the most impact.
Good. Similar question, but what's different now with 6 departments on Project Server?
Well, one of the benefits, I think, as well, is that, excuse me, as each of them have their own instances and they're kind of going through their growing pains as well, we get to learn from each other. So one of the other departments, I guess the second one that went on, right, biologics, they they took advantage of our lessons learned and then, excuse me, and created more custom fields that were more beneficial in the long term. And so you kind of see this cycle of lessons learned. And so then we saw what they were doing. It was better than what we were doing. So then, so it's back and forth. And so we were able to, start communicating that way and kind of driving all the instances better.
That's good. All right. Well, thank you.
Oh, you have a question?
Yes, question. Yes. Yes, so we use, I'll go back a few slides. So we're using the middle case there where we have the same hardware, but at Allergan they do have 6 instances, so each instance has a separate URL, if you will, on this. A separate resource pool. Yeah,
separate everything.
Yes. Yeah. No, so they basically are sharing their platform costs, but they're not able, they really haven't had a requirement to do cross-department resources and things like that. Yes? Okay, the question was, and I'll repeat questions, thank you. So have we had any instances where a department had any bad practices that would impact performance? It's been a number of years, but I do recall there were a few times where I think when we had maybe 2 departments on a set of hardware that wasn't sufficient, and one of them would, I can't remember if it was running the cube or task formulas or something, that it did seem to slow down the environment. So we actually, too, in the history of the hardware, at one point it was shared with even non-project server applications. So we, when it became clear we were going to be expanding to 6 departments, we made sure we got our dedicated SQL server so that there weren't even just resource contentions outside of users of Project Server. But yeah, I do recall there were a few times, but I can't remember specifically. Was there another question? Okay, good. We'll have time for questions. You can bring them as we go or at the end, too. Okay, so expansion best practices. So let's talk first about the case where you're going to expand and use a shared instance, the first case. You're going to bring 2 departments together in one instance. So 2 key best practices here. There's probably others, but 2 that come to mind. One is to document and analyze your existing configuration, and then you're going to use the department security model and workflows to segment. Let me talk about these in a little more detail. Document and analyze existing configuration. So it's really important to understand what are your custom fields, what are your lookup tables and values. If you're using workflow, what are your workflow stages, your project detail pages and what's on them, different views you have configured, and then of course on the security model, what does your security model look like? And it's really helpful. It's kind of, to go into the system and try to assess all this stuff, you can't see it in one place, so it's difficult. So what I recommend is, documenting that in Excel. You can, or get it more advanced where you run queries to document it. Or there's an excellent product you might have seen out there, Fluent Pro, Fluent Books, and that will actually document your whole project server environment. And this is just really a critical first step before you go combining 2 departments, because you're going to need to go to this second department and show them the custom fields that are there. Show them what's required fields. Show them what lookup tables are used for them to really validate. And it is a slow process, because you go to that second division, I'll call them Division B, right? And you show them this information, and they're going to want to make changes, and then you got to go back to Division A and make sure they agree to those changes. So, a lot of times the assumption is just going with the shared instance is the fastest, but I don't think that's always the case because of that back and forth, and you got to build a lot of concessions and things like that. And then maybe that's important for the business in the end, but it does take time, and really good documentation is the first step to that. And then when you go about configuring your single instance for multiple departments, these are going to be the keys right here. So you're going to use the department feature that was introduced first in Project Server 2010. If you're not on 2010 yet, you're definitely going to need to upgrade to have this department feature. And the department feature is going to allow you to segment your project fields and your resource fields and your enterprise project types by department. But in a general sense, that feature stops right there. And I've had customers assign a department, and then they think it's working. Users go to Project Center to create a new project. They pull down the list. They only see the project types that they've configured according to the department. Well, then they create a new project, and suddenly they see projects from every department. Well, that's because that's not a feature of the department field. The department field is not really meant for security. Yes? Yeah, and maybe I didn't clarify. So I'm talking these first two best practices are just for shared instances. So this would just be when you have one environment. Yeah, sorry. That's good to clarify that. So the point I want to make is that department field, if you haven't used it yet or you're just getting into it, it's going to control really the three things: the project fields, the resource fields, and the enterprise project types. But you need to go a few steps further to really segment your environment by department. And one of those steps is going to be using the resource breakdown structure, RBS field. This will allow you to have more of the security and filtering of projects and resources that you need. So someone in one department will only see projects in their department, if that's the requirement. They'll only see resources in their department, and they'll only see certain views, or views can be filtered. In the security model, it's more than just RBS. You may need to set up special categories to show the filtered views. And lastly, I think it's important to mention another one of your tools for this, having everyone in one instance, is going to be workflows. And even if you don't have an elaborate workflow with 6 stages, if you have a workflow with 1 stage, Project Server 2010 or 2013, what you're going to be able to do with that workflow is set different required or read-only fields by department. So one of the things you might be thinking of is, well, we have one department today, and they have these 6 required fields that you've just gone into enterprise fields and set as required. Well, when you bring in a second department, if you're using the required fields in your enterprise fields, they're going to all have to have the same required fields, and that might not be the requirement. So the tip here is that if you're bringing 2 departments into one instance, what you can do is don't use the required fields in enterprise fields. Set the fields as required in your workflow stages. That way you can have them by department. Make sense? Okay. Now we're going to head back to talk about pre-project 2013 expansion considerations. So let's say you're on Project Server 2010 right now, and you're thinking about expanding to a department. And when would you want to hold off bringing a new department onto your environment before you have Project Server 2013? So one of the reasons for holding off on bringing a new department on until you upgrade to 2013 would be if you have workflows. Workflows are a lot different, and I say this now because you wouldn't want to, for example, develop an elaborate workflow in 2010 and then upgrade to 2013 where the workflow has changed quite a bit. You have the ability to do workflows through a SharePoint Designer in 2013. If this new department requires importing projects from SharePoint lists, so this is a native feature of 2013, not one that you'd have in 2010. It would be another reason to maybe hold off on that department. If they're really big on SharePoint site integration, so you've probably seen a lot of this there's the simplicity of 2013 of navigating back and forth between the SharePoint site and the project detail pages. There's the web parts that are now on the SharePoint sites in 2013 that would show you the timeline view and the next set of tasks you have. Features of that nature, again, would maybe have you hold off on upgrading a department. If your new department is really big on the out-of-office calendar integration, that's another feature that's introduced in 2013. And lastly, just general improved performance. So because of the reduced page load times, things like that, these are important things to consider possibly upgrading to 2013 before you would bring that department on. Yes, question? Yes. So you're asking on 2013, do you have the ability to import a project from a SharePoint list? Does it work across farms? I do not know the answer. Does anyone else know? I would guess that you have to be on the same farm. Does anyone know? Okay, I'll get back to you on that one. That's a good question. Yes? There's an enhanced feature. So the question is, how is the SharePoint site integration different? So you still have the concept of one site per project. But I would say if you have a new department that's really big in using SharePoint sites, I think the simplicity now of being able to flip from your project detail pages right there in the quick launch, you have a link to go to the site. And then what really wasn't there is a link to go from the site back to that project detail page. So I think that makes it, a smooth transition. There are some more detailed features. You have, for example, the ability to see all the scheduled tasks that you have in your project now show up on the SharePoint site task list. So I think I'm making a very general statement here, but if you had a new department that you knew they were going to be a type of user that was going to go back and forth between the SharePoint site and the project schedule, there are really some nice benefits of 2013. Good questions. Okay, so some of the benefits of Project Online for expansion. One of the great things is you really would have the same options for a shared instance or a separate instance. So it's not, you don't have to think about hardware in this case, but if you have a new department that's coming online with the Project Online, you could bring them into the same environment you have or a separate one, again, based on their configuration and requirements, things like that. Speed is important. Actually, we had a customer that approached us right around Thanksgiving time, and they said that they had budget left in 2013, but it absolutely had to be spent by the end of 2013. This was actually a department of a customer that had a much larger project server environment on-premise, and they knew there was no way they would be able to spend their budget if they tried to go on the on-premise environment. So Project Online really was the solution there. It was great. We were able to get them up and going while they still had budget left in 2013. You can accommodate small or large departments. So you may be in a case where your project server environment, you have one department with 100 users, but the next one you're going to bring on has 1,000. So that would be a big difference in your hardware. So you can accommodate that with Project Online. Move department forward to the latest version. So per that last slide I have, maybe your new department is interested in a lot of these features. You're not ready to upgrade your current on-premise environment, so they could go to Project Online, even in a temporary basis until your on-premise environment was upgraded. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some best practices after you've expanded, and then interview Kenji one more time here. So what changes after you have multiple departments on Project Server? So these are both things that you have to keep in mind, and then also kind of best practices. So knowledge sharing sessions, I think, become increasingly important. You heard Kenji talk about this a little bit already. It was neat how he said that the second department that came online learned from their mistakes, The second department that came online then told them what they learned, and then Kenji's department improved. So you kind of have this trade-off in knowledge sharing, and it's important to get those users together, especially when they're in separate instances, because they may not be sharing information. Surveys are great to kind of gauge where each department is at in terms of their knowledge of the tool and also satisfaction with the tool. You may learn in surveys that there's a group that's doing their task statusing down to the daily level detail, and they're having trouble with that, where you may have another department that's doing simple percent complete task statusing. So you can identify specific areas to share knowledge when you do things like surveys. Coordinated patching becomes important unless you have physically separate environments. So what that means is that if you're going to apply a cumulative update, which comes out every 2 months, or a service pack that comes out roughly every, 20, 18 months, something like that. When you apply those patches to the server, you're going to have to communicate and have all your different instances on that environment be aware that there's going to be an outage for the upgrade, and then they may have project professional client updates they would need to do in coordination with that upgrade. Also, customizations are really important to be flexible. So in the case of Allergan, we have specifically 5 scientific departments, and there's customizations that we use across all 5 departments. So that meant when we were coding and setting up the customizations, we couldn't, for example, hard code the URL. We had to make it flexible to where the customization could come into the environment and then find the right instance that it was going to work with. Okay, Kenji, last set of questions here for you until we get to general questions. So Project Server, you've been on for 10 years. I think a good first question is this: have you kept it relevant and beneficial for 10 years?
Can't believe it's 10 years. So I think in terms of keeping it relevant and beneficial for us from the business side is really just that feedback loop, whether it's across instances or at least within our department, feedback from the users. When we first started it, excuse me, and you're supposed to establish what the requirements are. The problem is a lot of these people don't know what to tell you. They don't know what the right questions are. And so the IT department as well as others are guessing, and so there's that lessons learned in the beginning of establishing, okay, well, we're going to start tracking, and of course, a lot of individuals don't like that idea, they start thinking Big Brother, but once you start providing some reports, then they start asking more questions. And so one of the things we've always done, I think, each year is to reestablish and reevaluate, where we're at. Are we meeting the needs of the customers and the users, and what works, what doesn't, and be honest with ourselves on, what just didn't work for our environment. Doesn't mean that Project Server is not working well for us. It's just, for example, one of the things we don't use is timesheets, and we have other software that's part of our organization that uses that. But one of the complaints was, well, we want a consolidated solution, yet they don't want to use timesheets. So it was, we made effort to work together on figuring out what that consolidated solution would be. And so it's just little things. Sometimes it's just having an extra button somewhere that all of a sudden the users are like, oh, now I can use the system, So it's just little things like that. You'll find that once you get that open dialogue with your users, we were able to make a lot of things not only beneficial for the group, but made our lives easier in administrating the system.
Okay. And one of the questions I like to ask customers is, do you feel the providers and consumers of information feel the same way about the tool? So the people that are putting in information and the people getting the information out.
So, and I smile and Angie laughs right now. I think the answer is, I'll be diplomatic, not necessarily. The providers of the tool, definitely, I think they're very positive about it. they see the long-term benefit advantage. Along with that, some of the consumers, which would be management, which in the end of the day are probably your most important customers, love the products that are coming out of the project server. Unfortunately, some of the consumers are the ones entering the information. And again, in my environment, it's all scientists. And scientists feel not only it's difficult getting buy-in, but they will actively go against it. So they'll actively say, I'm a toxicologist. There's no need to do anything but toxicology. And so it's an interesting dynamic that we work with, and we need to cater to those needs as well. So it's up and down, I'll be honest, from the business side. But I think at the end of the day, they also see the advantage. High performers like it. The low performers may not like it as much because, again, visibility is there. But I think that's the product that you want.
Okay. So would you do anything differently if you had to start over today?
The biggest thing would be keep it simple. Like I said, the initial templates that we created, were hundreds and hundreds of task lines with multiple resources, you name it, we had it. And I think it was just very overwhelming for a lot of the users, I think. And even now, management, we're pushing on management to ask, okay, what is it that you really need to make the decision? Our management are also scientists, so they love data. They love to digest data. But 10 pages of data doesn't necessarily give you the best decision. And so we're also working with them to better understand what the needs are of our users.
Okay, great. So what about, just talking about upgrades, so what have you learned over the course of 3 upgrades?
I know, huh? 2003 seemed so basic compared to what we have now, and in particular the reporting. I think that was the biggest thing with the reporting services and the look and feel. I think the biggest thing was the reporting on that and to keep it simple. And even 2013 looks like with the reporting canvas and project, that would be a reason my management would want to upgrade, just that alone probably. But a lot of it is also the task updates. The usability of the system has increased, and that's one of the things. As a user myself, I'm not too interested in all the hoopla of the technology. I want to see how it works on a day-to-day basis, and I think through the upgrades that has helped a lot, and it has increased our compliance tremendously. Because from the beginning, the moment it was difficult for someone to click here, then click here, then click there, they're already gone. We lost them. And so, and that's just a reality, So the fact that we can eliminate one click, that helps a lot. So that has helped us. Through the upgrades.
I would also say I wouldn't consider that you've been an early adopter. It hasn't been that, right as, even as 2013 has been out for a while.
Oh, yeah, no.
You haven't upgraded yet. So it's been more of a slow and steady course for you. I'd say even features, once you did upgrade, you wouldn't jump on them right away. You would be more, let's try them out, let's pilot them a little bit before we make the change. So it's been kind of a slow and steady process.
Absolutely. And our organization itself is very conservative when it comes to technology as well as everything else. We are really probably the most moving forward department, so we usually are the guinea pigs in the company. But again, yes, we're still in 2010. We probably won't go to 2013 for a while, and that's just kind of how Allegan works at the moment.
Yeah. So. And I wanted you to mention something about data quality, because you do a lot of reporting, you're in a scientific organization, and how have you really worked to ensure you had high quality data in your environment?
Yeah, so being scientific drug development, data quality, data integrity is probably the most important to us. We have to follow regulations. It's not like where we can be 80% accurate or 82. It has to be 100% or the study's failed. So because of that demand on us, we have a lot of cross checks and checks and balances associated with it. And we came from a paradigm where everyone updates, and then we had a gatekeeper, which is Angie, And she would basically go through everything to make sure it was legitimate to go through. We're looking at options right now to centralize that, to remove some of the hundreds of users, so that we can get a little more control on it. And one of the things also is simplifying it. So we've gone on a lot of our studies and project levels from hundreds of tasks to dozens. And that has helped out quite a lot as well.
Yeah. Okay, great. And then last question. So what are you facing? So we've kind of talked about the past, but going forward, what do you think some of your current challenges are?
I think some of the dynamic reporting options, because we have different data sources as well. And again, it's a good problem to have where management is now asking more questions, and they want to see data sliced in a different way. And so one of our biggest challenges is to pull reports out of the system and then manually manipulate it and then represent. And that's what we've been doing. And so we're always looking for opportunities to automate as well as be able to present data the way it's most effective for our management. And with 2010, that's why one of the comments I made was 2013 even provides a little bit more, that some of the things that we're currently reporting, but we're doing it manually. And it's just manpower, then you introduce errors possibly. So, any reporting opportunities we like to take advantage of.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kenji. Okay, so kind of a closing slide here. So some takeaways. Maybe you're in two different cases here, and we'll have time for a question and answer as well. So if you've expanded without planning, you're back to that very early Tetris example I gave where you have a fragmented environment. So my recommendations are don't fret. I think an upgrade is a good opportunity for course correction. So when you do upgrade, you're going to go through, of course, looking at features that are going to be available in a new environment, but it also gives you a chance to straighten up some things. A knowledgeable partner can help you set up maybe a security model or RBS, some of those things that we talked about earlier in your environment that are going to help organize the departments a lot better. If you're planning an expansion, then I'd suggest you go back and look at that decision tree that I showed earlier. Look at some of the structure options you have. Think about those so that you can plan and grow in a course that makes sense, one that will allow the different departments to get in and out of the system what they need. So with that, we will have some just general question and answer, but also want to get back to my offer. If you would like to be involved in our charity auction, or not auction, but donation, just give Jacques a business card there, and we'll pull one out. We actually have some Girl Scout cookies to give away first, and then the winner will give $100 to a charity of their choice.
And one thing to add, I would say, if you're expanding, what we found to be very helpful, and Scott and PP Works have been great, is that you're sitting down with your business units and getting them all on the same page and getting them just in a room together. It's amazing some of the discussions that people, even if they have their own instance, they just think differently. And so it's great to, if you're expanding to another department, to share that knowledge transfer with them. And even after you implement, it's the business unit, at least in Allergan, that has to deal with a lot of the issues. And so we're basically the face of the system, not our IT department. So when there's a complaint, they don't go to another building. They come down the hall, and they start knocking on the office. So work with your future admins, so to speak, on the business side as well. And that has helped out a lot because then, one, during implementation, we can answer a lot of questions or escalate issues as well.
Yeah, so. Great. Yes, question. I'll repeat the question. Right. So the question was, on reporting and business intelligence, what tools do you use the most in the platform?
We use a combination of the views. That's one of our primary reporting. And the other thing is the report builder. So
yeah, so many of you may not know this with SSRS. I mean, SSRS has the capability to to create reports, and a lot of times as a consultant I'll go in and create a set of reports, but one of the things that we did at Allergan was we set up something called a report model, which is it's a SSRS feature where end users, power users can go and create their own reports using a report builder tool. And I think we set that up years ago, and now Angie and Kenji have probably over 100 reports that they've just created on their own through Report Builder. So that's one of their primary tools.
That is the primary tool. I mean, 90% of our management reports come out of that Report Builder. And for us, it gives us the flexibility so we don't have to keep on asking for these built-in reports. And we just build what we want. As long as the field is there, we build the report. And then we save it as a template if we ever need it again. And a lot of our reports are monthly and quarterly. Also, we have weekly. So that's our primary.
And I'd probably say it's really similar to what you have today in Excel 2013 with Power View and Power Pivot. So just those technologies weren't available for Kenji, 7-10 years ago. So he used Report Builder. Yeah. Yes.
With your system that you have for 10 years, obviously, work on how do you, with an organization that large, how can you describe to me a little bit about the archival process? How do you retire a project? How do you support those users in multiple departments?
I'll repeat it first, then you can answer. So good question. The question was, with a large environment, multiple departments, and lots of projects, what have you done for archival? Which also is a good question for using Project Server over that long to make sure that the data in your environment's not stale and unnecessary.
Right, and I know that question's come up in other sessions as well, and we're still learning, I'll be honest. One of the ways, excuse me, is using a project field and marking it complete or archived, and then they can be separate. In terms of the formal archiving of removing it, we haven't done that, so we have them there. We have a way of cataloging everything, and so that helps. And then what was recommended in another session was just by having the customized fields for our report builder or any type of views, it's already being filtered. And so filtering is probably our number one methodology of doing that. We don't necessarily have a formal archiving process yet.
Okay, good question. Is there another one? Yes. So the question is, do you use the portfolio analysis capabilities?
I will answer, I'm not familiar with it, so I would say no.
Yeah, so out of the 6 groups there's only one that's getting into portfolio analysis, so that's their first one, and they really went live on the system. It's their IT group, and they went live about a month ago. So
I will say most of our portfolio analyses are outside the system, and there's a couple reasons why. Organizationally, our portfolio is always changing and is being driven by basically our corporate system that we have, which is kind of a homegrown project system. And so because that's where we're getting our information, so it's kind of a hybrid in the middle for our portfolio analysis.
Okay, good. Well, let's do our drawing unless there's other questions.